What would make Hester Peirce most happy to see done in 2025 potentially?
I mean, I would be happy if at the end of 2025, people were not, when we go to crypto conferences, the first thing people were talking about would be something other than SEC regulation. I want people to get to the point where the regulatory structure is there, they know what the rules are, they're complying with the rules, but they're spending their time talking about the technology and its potential. That would make me very happy.
SEC Commissioner Hester Peirce, back on Coinage. Thanks so much for coming back on.
Great to be here, Zach. Thanks for having me. Of course, I've got to tell you my views are my own as a commissioner, not necessarily those of the SEC or my fellow commissioners.
Yes, of course. And we appreciate your own view every time you come on here, because I always learn something and our community always learns something. And right now, just want to jump right into it because a lot's going on at the SEC. Seems like you've got Chair Gensler stepping down. One of your fellow commissioners was up for renomination, not happening anymore. So just first, Commissioner Peirce, what's the state of the SEC right now?
I mean, it's a time of transition for everyone in Washington right now. And I think that's the same at the SEC. We're looking ahead to now, a month from now, what will change. And I think there's a lot of optimism that we can make some forward progress on things. And so there's still going to be a time of uncertainty because it will take some time before our new chairman gets here. But there are, I think, some things that we can do right out of the gate, at least get processes started to make some changes.
Yeah, I think, when it comes to those changes too, obviously it seems like there's going to be a bit of a process, but how long does it take to maybe have those things trickle through a new administration, new chair? What does that look like?
Well, I think what happens on day one is you get an acting chair designated, and then the acting chair can start working on things that are a priority. And one of those issues is going to be crypto. There are a lot of other things going on at the commission. And so we'll get to work. I think one of the things with respect to crypto specifically that we've been saying is that it's really important to have a conversation, and people have been scared to come to the SEC over the past several years to have a conversation, but we're hoping that tone will change and that people will be willing to come in and talk to us, and that we can then figure out as a community, regulators and regulated, what we need to do to move forward. And that should be an open conversation so that everyone can participate, and we can get to the right place.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about what that looks like too under, President Trump picking Paul Atkins, who I know you've worked with before, to lead the agency. Assuming that goes through, what kind of you expect might be kind of a day one change at the SEC under Chair Atkins for what that could look like when it comes to crypto policy and what you want to see changed, perhaps most pressingly?
Well, I did work for Chair Atkins. Well, I hope incoming Chair Atkins. He was a commissioner back then. I worked for him for several years while he was a commissioner. And what I really admired about him is that he does take he's very carefully committed to administrative process. He's very carefully committed to capital formation, to thinking about having opportunities available and letting the market test those opportunities, and not having the regulator step in to test opportunities, but allowing the market to figure it out, get the disclosure right, and then let the market figure it out. I can't make commitments as to how he's going to approach crypto, but I think those principles of caring about due process and administrative process, and caring about transparency and disclosure, but also about investor choice, I suspect that all of those things will play into it. And then also being very mindful of where the jurisdictional boundaries of the agency are. I think that'll be something that he's also very committed to. He comes with many years of experience with securities related issues, and there'll be many issues on his agenda, again, besides crypto.
Yeah.
But I think that it will certainly be an area that he spends time thinking about.
Well, when it comes to crypto, I feel like there were a lot of good ideas that under Chair Gensler seemed like they were kind of dead on arrival, including a lot of your good ideas too when it comes to regulatory sandboxes or token safe harbor. When it comes to maybe a new administration and a likelihood of some of those things getting done, Which one do you think seems like the most likely to get done in terms of what you just addressed there under a new way of thinking at the SEC?
Well, I hope that people will start thinking about something like the token safe harbor. And I think we need to be thinking about things in sort of different stages. What do you want to have done right away? Are there barriers that we've set up that we can remove? So
Mm-hmm.
you think about something like a SAB 121 type thing. And then are there ways that we can allow people to experiment? And then you think of something like the a sandbox type concept, right? Or is there a regime that we can set up? No action letters, those kinds of things, exemptive orders.
Mm-hmm.
And then is there clarity that we can provide early on to say, you know what, some of this stuff is just not securities transactions. You don't have to worry about it. So we want to think about that.
How
And
quickly? How
then
quickly
are
do you think
there,
something like that could get done, just in terms of like day one
how
coming in and
quickly?
issuing? Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to say, and you can also think about maybe you get some temporary relief out there right away, and then you build toward longer term relief because I think it is going to be important to have roundtables, to be talking with the CFTC, to be talking potentially with other regulatory agencies. And so that those conversations are going to take some time. Those roundtables will take time. But are there immediate things that you can do? It's not going to be day one for this is a regulator. We're not always fast, and there'll be a lot of adjustments and a lot of things going on in those first weeks and months. But I think we can make some early progress. And that is why people should, if they have ideas of sort of, even if it's a temporary thing, if they have ideas of what we can be doing, they should be giving those ideas to us and thinking about that. What would
Yeah.
be useful to have?
Well, there are other things that you and I have discussed. Last time you came on Coinage, we were talking about the idea of, some things that were also immediately not allowed under the ETFs. We'll use those as an example, including in-kind redemptions and staking. Across the pond, we've seen staking go live on some ETPs. I'm kind of curious because you said you were open to reconsideration on those points. Under a new chair, I suspect that would be a pretty easy thing to consider in day one as well, since you've already looked at that. How likely is something like that, whether it's in-kind redemptions for Bitcoin ETFs or ETH ETFs when it comes to staking? How likely are those
Mhm.
changes potentially to pass?
Well, again, it's something that people raise with me pretty frequently. So I imagine that question is going to be posed to us early on. And as I said, I'm open to reconsidering both in kind and staking to think about, again, how can you allow people to design the products in the way that's most useful to the investors in those products.
Hmm. Well, I mean, how much? Obviously, again, if it comes in, the new incoming chair comes in right now. As I said, your fellow commissioner Carolyn Crenshaw, looking like that's not going to happen in terms of renomination. So we talked about this last time. The things that you like about having people with differing viewpoints at the SEC to discuss all these things, and that it's not always just the chair doing these things unilaterally. But when it comes to that dynamic, if you do just have three commissioners at the SEC, how does it change maybe some of the hurdles to get things like that done?
Well, I mean, the composition of the commission certainly determines what gets through and what doesn't. So that will be a factor. It is important to get a lot of different viewpoints involved, and that's why I say we're going to be looking for people from the outside to be weighing in. But certainly if you're able to, I mean, if it changes from a majority of commissioners who don't want things to go through to a majority of commissioners who do want things to go through, then yeah, it's easier.
Let's talk about some of those things that might also go through. And I think, without prejudging or talking about one specific application or whatever it may be specifically, there's been a lot of excitement in terms of things beyond Ether. And we've already talked about the process in terms of getting these things approved. Solana, Ripple, some of these other cryptocurrencies fall into the same bucket of how does this look? And again, we've seen approvals in other jurisdictions outside the US. So when it comes to those things, how does maybe the approval process change under a new SEC administration?
I mean, I hope what we'll do on those things is as those applications come in, we'll look at them on their facts and circumstances, and we'll put them against appropriate precedent, and we'll work through them in that way. I think each application will present unique facts and circumstances that we have to think about.
I also wanted to ask you too about ICOs seemingly making a comeback. That's an interesting thing. It seems secular what we see play out, and I think you would agree that shutting everything down before created this weird shift to meme coins. I don't necessarily want to mention Fartcoin passing $1 billion, but I just did, I guess. And it's a really weird thing when you have meme coins become the default way to crowdfund, I suppose. And that doesn't seem like a win-win for anybody necessarily. So, I mean, I'm kind of curious to get your take on this rebirth of ICOs, maybe potentially jumping the ship over some ideas of what the SEC might look at those for moving forward. How do you react to maybe seeing some of the market dynamics play out? As you say, we're in this kind of weird transition period.
Yeah, well, I think you're right, Zach, to bring up this idea of how does the focus of the industry change when the regulatory structure changes. If we have a regulatory structure that says, hey, if you're selling tokens, we want you to make disclosures around those tokens, and you can do that and you can move forward. I think people are likely to say, well, that sounds good. Let's figure out a way to make those disclosures and we can move forward. So I think I'm very interested to see how things will change once we can build a framework, even if it's a temporary framework, to say, we're going to give you no action relief. We're going to allow some of this to happen. Again, facts and circumstances matter, and we want to, whatever we do, we want to make sure that it's protective of people's ability to know what they're buying. And we also want to be appropriately deferential to Congress, which gets to decide who gets to regulate this stuff. So we're going to be thinking about those kinds of things.
Well, as you mentioned too, I mean, you've worked with Paul before, if I can call him by his first name, but you've worked with Mr. Atkins before, and I assume you guys have chatted already. What have kind of been those discussions like in terms of, I guess, what you plan to do together as a smaller team at the SEC with your fellow commissioners to maybe get some of those things addressed?
Oh, I mean, there'll be a lot of time to talk to him, but he's, I think when you get nominated or when you get named for that kind of a position, there are a lot of people who want to talk to you. So we will have a lot of time to have good conversations. We've obviously known each other for a long time, and Mark, Commissioner Ueda as well. The three of us have all worked together, and so I think it's a really wonderful opportunity to come back together and try to move some of this stuff forward.
I wanted to ask too, maybe a question less for Commissioner Peirce, maybe more just for Hester in terms of your understanding of crypto Bitcoin and the idea of kind of where it came from. And as we've discussed before, as a regulator, letting liberty kind of reign in terms of protecting investors, but also giving people the options. I'm kind of curious to get your take on maybe what you've seen in terms of Bitcoin and its path as kind of an anti-Wall Street shenanigans, anti-central bank cryptocurrency in the way that it came about, to now see so many players that are kind of that world, like a BlackRock, or what's happening with MicroStrategy. And again, not from like a regulatory perspective, but what's kind of your take personally when it comes to maybe the risk of maybe Wall Street shenanigans maybe striking again when it comes to games that can be played with an asset that is not necessarily created with that in mind?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting discussion to have, right? There's going to be, I mean, I do like that let liberty reign, which means that people in TradFi and people outside of TradFi can both use a tool or an asset, and they might use it for different reasons. But whatever we do end up doing in this space, we have to make sure that we don't lose sight of the fundamental principles underlying the technology. And certainly one of those fundamental principles is that there is an advantage to decentralizing things. There is an advantage to having people be able to have unfettered access to financial products and services that doesn't depend on having to go through a centralized intermediary and get the favor of that centralized intermediary. We've seen examples of how problematic that can be. I think even in recent discussions around whether people involved in crypto are able to get bank accounts, right? That's an example of how a centralized entity can stop people from getting access to things. So let's remember the value of a decentralizing technology that enables people who don't know one another to coordinate their activity with one another in a way that enables everyone to see what the terms are of the transaction and everyone to enter into the transaction on the same terms. There is going to be centralized stuff related to crypto. I think that's always the case.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to remember that the strength of the technology and what will be underpinning a lot of that centralized stuff is decentralized, and it is stronger because it is decentralized.
In the spirit of that too, I guess, just to play devil's advocate, right, in terms of President Trump active right now with his own kind of DeFi project, or at least his family and that project as well, there are maybe some people watching all this play out and saying that the SEC suddenly might completely shift the opposite direction. Are there risks potentially with the agency becoming too pro-crypto if the president wants the U.S. to become the center the center of crypto around the world, I suppose. So just playing devil's advocate there, are there maybe fears around the SEC as it shrinks, maybe doesn't have as much differing opinions, as we said off the top? What do you tell people when it comes to that?
I think what I tell people is the reason we have the best capital markets in the world is because we regulate them well. And that means we set parameters that allow people a lot of flexibility within those parameters. And the markets can then speak. Investors from all over the country and all over the world can come here and they can express their opinions. Companies from all over the world can come here and raise money. You don't have to be wealthy in order to raise money in our capital markets. You don't have to know someone wealthy to do that. And so we need to do the same thing with respect to innovative asset classes and technologies, which is we need to have reasonable regulations in place and then allow a lot of freedom within that for people to make their decisions about what to do. We should never be perceived as being a merit regulator on the negative side or on the positive side. It's not my decision to whether or not you invest in crypto or whether or not you invest in particular shares of a particular company. It's my job to make sure the world is your oyster and you get to choose where you want to put your money.
Yeah, I only have a couple more questions for you since I know we're tight on time. But in terms of that piece, last time we had you on, it was a lot of discussion around how frustrating is this to be the commissioner of reason who wants to see some things get done that I think would help everything you just said in terms of the U.S. being best for capital markets in crypto. Now that everything's basically flipped, I'm kind of curious to get your sense of excitement. Finally now, as maybe all of that is changed, what you're most excited about, what would make Hester Peirce most happy to see done in 2025 potentially, as I threw a lot at you, whether it is kind of restaking or in-kind redemptions, things like that. What is it?
I mean, I would be happy if at the end of 2025, people were not, when we go to crypto conferences, the first thing people were talking about would be something other than SEC regulation. I want people to get to the point where the regulatory structure is there, they know what the rules are, they're complying with the rules, but they're spending their time talking about the technology and its potential. That would make me very happy.
Well, Christmas is right around the corner. I think that'd be a very good Christmas wish. Granted, hopefully, as we see you out there on the trail again at other crypto conferences. I suppose, too, Commissioner Peirce, when it comes to maybe challenges now in the crypto world, as you see them play out, if there are now maybe things on your radar as well. I mean, a lot of people, even at crypto, we were at PubKey last night. Not you and I, but I was. And I know you've been out there before. The idea of maybe centralization risks, Coinbase being one of the custodians for a lot of the Bitcoin ETFs, other things that maybe potentially should be changed that you still want to see kind of pursued under the new SEC.
Well, I think that's, one of the things that when you build a regulatory structure that allows different people to participate, you also create the conditions for competition, which I think is healthy for everyone involved. And so we need to have that regulatory framework. But, certainly I always underscore to people that when you're in a bull market, you've got to be thinking about the risks. You've got to be thinking about, when you buy something, you've got to be skeptical and ask questions and think about your ability to lose what you're putting in. And so those time-tested principles, I think people should always be thinking about those things. Whether it's TradFi or crypto, there always are people out there who are sitting there trying to to take the money that you have, and so you have to be careful. But I think we'll be in a better place if we can build a framework that makes sense.
I also just one more question around kind of this transition period, because even just I think this week we saw another Wells notice issued to an NFT project, CyberKongz. I think, again, not getting into specifics around the case specifically, but the idea of kind of that threat hanging over the industry still. How long do you think maybe that takes to come through the system? Obviously, it's not just commissioners at the agency. There are teams working on things. How long does maybe the old kind of regime still linger in terms of turning the page?
Well, I mean, there are some difficult things to navigate for the new commission, certainly, and I think we'll be working on navigating a lot of very difficult questions.
Lastly, for you too, Commissioner Peirce, your term is up in the summer of 2025. We had talked before; it was a dream, and I hope I'll always think Hester Peirce should be president of the U.S. as far as I'm concerned. But not talking about chair of the agency, not talking about any of that. But your term, specifically at the SEC, up in the summer, I think I saw maybe potentially you thinking about being a beekeeper as well. What is Commissioner Peirce's plans at the SEC now in 25, and do you want to stay?
Well, so I really am looking forward to this opportunity to work with Commissioner Atkins, with Commissioner Ueda, and Commissioner Crenshaw will still be here for some time, and so the three of us will work on these issues. The four of us will work on these issues, I should say. And my term does end in June, as sort of it's a little bit of a piece of trivia, but you can stay on even after your term. So I don't know exactly how long I'll be at the agency, but I'm enjoying my time still here.
Right, and obviously a very new dynamic to come as we turn the page and look ahead to 2025. But Commissioner Peirce, again, as we always say, I can't thank you enough for coming on. We're a small little community-owned outlet over here at Coinage, and to have you on, always appreciate the time. Happy holidays to you as well, and thank you again.
Happy holidays. I always enjoy our conversations. Thank you.